going live right now. Oh, this meeting is being live streamed. Boom. Okay, good.
Are you only going to live stream it to YouTube?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I think you can only do one place at a time, but maybe not. I don't know.
Did we do like 3 places when we did that other thing? I was like, wait.
Oh,
like,
I know what you mean. Yeah, you're right. I did Zoom and no, I didn't. I did Instagram and TikTok once.
Oh, wow.
I didn't do that today.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah, we had like 1,000 viewers on TikTok that time.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So I can start recording and then go and get started. But now that we're on YouTube and the whole world's watching, do you have any questions we should have talked about earlier?
Hopefully not.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and start recording, and then we can get to it. All right, psychology nerds, and welcome to another episode of Psychology and Stuff, the podcast out of Phoenix Studios at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. I'm Ryan Martin, one of the hosts of Psychology and Stuff, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host. She is the chair of the UW Green Bay Psychology Program, an environmental psychologist and statistician. Also my pal is Dr. Georgina Wilson-Dengis. How's it going, G?
It is going great. You added stuff to my intro there.
Yeah.
I am now more official. Thanks for the shout out to being an environmental psychologist and a statistician. I feel like you just elevated me. Thanks.
Oh, wow. Well, I was just, I was trying to play around with it because I didn't want to just say the same thing I always say. So yeah, usually you're my friend. This time you were my pal. That is, I don't know if that's higher or lower status. What do you think? Is friend better or worse?
I feel like pal is way worse than friend.
Is it? Oh, okay.
I feel like I don't know. I don't really particularly like pal. So if you could go back to friend, but you can.
How about chum? Is that?
Oh, yeah, that's better.
You know how I feel about sharks.
Yes.
So chum is really like a compliment.
Like you're going to throw me off the boat kind of compliment. I don't
Yes.
really find that a compliment.
Okay.
But,
no, I hear that. Okay.
Yeah, if I had to choose between friend, pal, and chum, I think I'm just going to be like a coworker.
Okay, sounds good. Well, that's dangerous. Did Jason share with you that I accidentally told him I loved him at work the other day?
No.
That's sweet.
Yeah. I was walking out of his office and I was just like, see you later, love you. Yeah, I know. And then I was like, no, sorry. And then he was like, it's fine. So
Well, did he say it back?
He has since then.
Okay.
So
Wow.
yeah.
Well, I'm kind of sad now. When you end this episode, I best be hearing those words,
right.
or I might be quitting. This might be it, listeners. This might be my last episode if I don't get some love at the end.
All right. Well, I think we've already heard our guest a few times. I think we should introduce her.
Absolutely.
She is also someone our listeners know and love. She's an assistant professor in the psychology program here at UW Green Bay. She researches adult development and aging with a specific emphasis on health promotion. She focuses on healthy aging in middle age and older adults. She studied adult physical activity engagement, and she's a wizard with statistics. She has a master's and a PhD in lifespan development psychology from West Virginia University. It's Dr. Abby Nearcorn Bailey. How are you, Abby?
Hello, I'm great. I love that I'm a wizard. So that's good.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I realized as I was putting the intros together that I highlighted the fact that both of you are statisticians. And so I'm feeling outnumbered, honestly.
Well,
what are the odds of that? Sorry.
Outnumbered.
Yes. No, I'm just killing it with the statistics references. So,
I like it.
So I feel like a nice segue into this, by the way, as I was writing your intro today, I was thinking about the fact that I hurt myself last week reading and became and not just kind of hurt myself, but really hurt myself and started to become worried about I guess health promotion in middle-aged adults. And so yeah, so as I was writing, I was like, should I reveal that to her? Should I tell her that I hurt myself reading? Now I'm sharing it with not just you, but everyone.
So. Right.
Yes.
Well, was it like a really bad paper cut, or like what happened?
I wish I would. That would have been great. I was standing while I was reading, because I was recording my audiobook, and I was standing for a long period of time. And when I was done, I had done something terrible to my knee that meant that for like 3 days I was walking with a limp. So much that my kids were actually making fun of me. Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. So
yeah, that is worse than a paper cut. Yeah.
Yeah. It was rough. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
So I bring this up because the last episode you were on, I think, was titled "Does Getting Old Suck?"
Right.
Sometimes yes.
Oh, well, maybe we just need to look at things in a little bit of a different way. And, if we're doing things that we're not used to, such as standing for a really long time, maybe that's something that's just a little bit harder on some of our joints. And that could probably happen to anybody if we're doing things that we're not used to.
Okay. I like that reframe.
Yeah, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad.
I appreciate that reframe. That is very, very helpful.
Wow, you're so much more positive. The rest of us were just mocking him and saying that he had the nerdiest of all injuries. Like,
that's
well, I wasn't going to say anything, but no. No.
I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how I was going to tell people I hurt myself in case this was really chronic. Like if this was longer than like 2 or 3 days, I needed to come up with something, right?
Sure.
So anyways.
It happens. It can happen.
Yeah. So let's get into today's topic, which is I don't know. I don't necessarily know how to kick this off other than to say I was curious, and some other listeners were curious about kind of how emotions change over adulthood. So I sent you, or Georgina sent you, ultimately a very vague, hey, can we talk about this? Let's talk about socio-emotional selectivity theory. Let's talk about how emotions change as we age. I don't know, why don't we start with that question? What are some of the biggies? Like, what are some of the ways that emotions change as we age?
Sure. Well, I can just kind of take a step here and give a little bit of background on Laura Carstenson's theory, SST, as I'm going to say, because it's a lot shorter. So the big idea behind the theory is that based on essentially our perception of our future, we have different goals, different social motivation. And what we see is that generally somebody who is older is going to have a little bit of a different future perception than somebody who is a young adult, for example. However, research has been done showing that it's not just chronological age that is a factor. If somebody who is 20 years old has a limited future time or horizon, then their goals would also change. Essentially, Carstenson's theory would pose. So we don't just think about it in regards to age, but the idea is that with a more limited future perception, our goals change for the people that we want to spend our time with, how we spend our time in general, and how we look at what we're doing. So we tend to focus more on spending time with people we have a close connection with. So we're not going to go out and try to make friends with somebody that we don't know. We're not going to go out and try to spend time with acquaintances or do things that we don't really enjoy doing. We're going to really focus on maximizing our time and doing the things we like. And research has been done looking at how people, as they get older, they become more emotionally stable, more balanced, and overall more positive. And we can get into that more, but that's really where it's different from younger adults. They are much more thinking about the future and what that could entail. And so that then brings on this search for more information. So looking at all kinds of different things they may want to do with their lives, meeting new people, experiencing new things. And so that's the difference between the two, just based on, in one way, SST and the future time that we have and how we see those differences.
So the one article that we were reading was talking about a study that was done on daily life stressors, which is, I'm sure, like directly related to emotions at the time. But I was kind of shocked to read the results that said that your response to stress actually improves as you grow older. How is that related to SST and these other thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. So I think, and I agree with the author, they really lay out 3 specific ways in which we can explain why we see that those daily stressors maybe don't have as much of an impact on older adults. The first, I think, really has to do with the social goals that people have. So like I said, with SST, the idea is that generally older adults are going to have this larger focus on emotion regulation and making sure that they're spending their time the way they want to, with whom they want to. Whereas for younger adults, it's trying out new things, taking on new roles, meeting new people, all of that. The second piece is directly a part of SST. So the author of this article then talks about future time perception, which we know is really the central piece of Parsonson's theory. And then lastly, they talk about learning to deal with stressors. Older adults, generally, they're going to have more years of experiencing maybe some of these daily events that do cause us stress. And so just from that standpoint, they have more practice with it. But also, I think a key piece that I kind of mentioned previously, the fact that as we get older, we become a bit more balanced emotionally, more emotionally stable. I think that's another key piece as to why maybe older adults are not having those daily stressors affect them quite as much. So that probably ties into all 3 of the reasons that the author lays out as well.
Yeah, a way I've heard this described is that, people are willing to endure some negative emotions in order to increase resources. But to do that, you've got to see that those resources are going to be valuable, right? You've got to see that those. And so one of the examples I've used in class is the idea that, like, one of the challenges of being a returning adult college student is that you've got to endure all sorts of stress that maybe to be a college student. And when you're, say, 50 years old, it might become or feel less, you might be less willing to endure some of that because you don't necessarily see what those benefits are after you're done, right? But when you're in your 20s and you say, no, this is what I need to do to set myself up for it, right? It becomes enduring some of those negative stressors feels more relevant. Is that a fair description of this?
Yeah, probably. Especially when we're younger, we might feel, and we do sense that we have, these long-term sorts of goals and just in general, a long time left. We're probably more willing to do some of those things that might not be as great. But again, that acquisition of knowledge is a key piece there. And if that's one of our goals, yeah, we might take some of these things we don't love so much, or we endure some things that in general we might not want to, for that goal and to get to maybe that next step. Whereas somebody who's older, their time horizon is a bit more limited, it might not be as appealing to them. So it might not be as worth it to go through some negative things, especially if it's not important to them.
And I think we took some questions on social media that our listeners were interested in hearing about. And one of them made me think about a stereotype of older folks being maybe like grumpy, or somehow that's related to like the anger emotion or something like that. I was also thinking about filters and how there's might be a stereotype that older folks have less filters when they are expressing emotions, but that kind of goes against what this research says. It seems to contradict it. Do you have any thoughts about that? That wasn't a great question that I just asked, but hopefully you can extract something from there.
Yes, I think I can. So your first point, just in terms of thinking about older adults as being grumpy or grumpier in comparison to younger people, I agree. I think that is an age stereotype. I think it's probably something that's reinforced pretty commonly in TV shows or movies, or I don't know, different greeting cards that we see out at the store. And so I think it's something where we've seen it a lot. I mean, I can think of different movies where I've seen that, and it's something that over time we internalize. Not that we even mean to, but it's just something that we see frequently. And that's how, we essentially get to those sorts of stereotypes and think that's something that is common when it might not be the case. So that's my thought on that. I especially looking at the research, it's really interesting. And we can wait to get into this, but just with life satisfaction, generally, we see that life satisfaction increases through adulthood, specifically looking at middle age onto late adulthood. And so that really makes me think that we're not necessarily seeing that older adults as a group become grumpier. Maybe again, it's how they're displaying it and then how others are analyzing it. I'm not sure exactly what to make of that. However, we do tend to see that in advanced old age, so maybe thinking about like 80s, 90s, we do tend to see that life satisfaction does then dip, and so it can decline. So maybe some of those pieces are setting in. I'm not going to say that older adults at that point get grumpy, but there are stressors that play a key role in adults' lives. I mean, just the prevalence of chronic health conditions, thinking about losing loved ones. There are these issues or these components that are stressors for everybody, but we do see it even more so among aging adults too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I hit a stage in my life where I realized that, I went through a stage where all my friends were getting married and having kids and graduating from college, not necessarily in that order, but, doing those things. And it was fun, right? It was fun to see all of that good news and things like that. And then I noticed all of a sudden sort of a shift in that to all of a sudden when I was starting to hear stories about friends getting sick, friends getting divorced, friends' parents getting sick and things like that. And that it seemed like those things were coming together. And so I get what you're saying about like, there are these sort of episodic shifts in our life that where it feels like we encounter new types of stressors. Now, I imagine at a certain point, we're going to hit like my friends' kids getting married, right? My friends, things like that will like a new sort of shift in good news that does play a role in how we feel about things. I think the other piece of this, though, that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is a lot of this is about it's there's overall life satisfaction. There's also the emotions we kind of invite into our life. Like, how do we choose to spend our free time? What do we choose to do? Who do we choose to spend it with? I mean, I use that example of going to school, but it can be as simple as, so full disclosure, I was one of those really obnoxious video store employees once who, was judgy of people who came in and rented like The Rock or like stupid, like kind of cookie cutter action movies. Like, why would you do that when there's so many good movies, man? There's awesome stuff to watch. And like, now that I'm older and like I kind of deal with different kinds of stress throughout my day, at the end of the day, I just want to sit down and watch a stupid action movie, and so sometimes it's about saying like, hey, and I think this is a big piece of that, like just what we choose to invite in. Do we choose to make ourselves sad by things like that? Do we choose to fight with our romantic partner? And I think that's related to that stereotype. I mean, I hear people talk about like couples arguing like an old married couple or something like that, but I think actually most of the data says that they don't argue as often as
right.
other couples.
Yeah, marital satisfaction actually increases with through adulthood. So again, I think maybe part of that is just these things that we so commonly hear but aren't necessarily supported by the actual data. And I think in general, as adults and then continuing as they get older, at least the idea behind SST is that they do become just more strategic in picking those activities that they're doing that are going to make them happy and that are memorable and enjoyable. So kind of what you were talking about, Ryan, just they're more selective in that regard.
Do you think that happens intentionally, or is it maybe the answer is both, or is it more they just sort of gravitate towards more positive activities, or how do you think that plays out?
That's a good question, and I don't really, I mean, I can answer it, but I'm not sure if this is actually supported in the data, but I would think to some extent both. There could be some awareness that I'm going to go and see my good friends and my kids because I'm really close to them and I enjoy hanging out with them. We have a good time. Versus I have no desire to go to the neighborhood block party and try to meet these people that I've never met before. So there could be at least some level of, awareness in that regard of what I'm choosing. But then maybe over time, it's, just something that we've become used to doing. And we might not think about it in a step-by-step way and think about the fact that, oh, wow, I'm choosing to do these things that I'm enjoying versus the things that really don't have any significance to me. So there might not necessarily always be that level of thought about it or analyzing the things to that extent. We might just start doing them and think about, okay, what do I care about doing? And we do it. So I think a little bit of both, honestly.
And I wonder, when you were saying like you're choosing not to do things that don't spark joy, like as Marie Kondo would say, I wonder if that might contribute to the perception of being grumpy, is that the people who get selected out because maybe they're not super fun to be around, are the people who are reacting in that way and perceiving the person as grumpy because they're choosing not to spend their time with that particular person. I never really thought about it that way, but
I haven't either, but I think that could happen. And then it just become this self-fulfilling prophecy. And all of a sudden they're deemed to be grumpy. But I think there could be some truth to that. I think that makes sense.
So could you take us through, earlier today, I emailed, or maybe it was yesterday, I emailed a bunch of questions, and I do want to just go through those and see if we answered them or if we have any thoughts on any of them. But before we do, I was curious because you responded with a really thoughtful email about kind of the U-shaped trajectory. And I know you touched on it a little earlier, but could you walk us, the listeners, through that U-shape?
Absolutely. So when it comes to life satisfaction, there have really been two sides that researchers have been on support for, one of two. For many years, researchers saw from the data and believed that life satisfaction essentially went through this U-shaped trajectory, where early on in life, life satisfaction is decently high, same through teenage years, but then once we get closer to middle age, we really dip down and life satisfaction is going to be at that low point. And that was explained in a variety of ways that do make sense. I mean, in general, we know that middle-aged adults are considered the sandwich generation. They're oftentimes caring for their children, as well as potentially providing care for their aging parents. It can be a tough time with jobs, with doing different things for family and personal life. So there was support for this and why it could have this U-shape. And then getting out of middle age, you then go back up and get better or have better life satisfaction. However, other researchers then said, I don't support this. It doesn't seem as though it is this U-shaped trajectory. And in general, it seems as though these other data are suggesting life satisfaction is more stable across the lifespan. And if anything, maybe we then have this dip at the or near the end or in advanced older adulthood, but that in general, it's not this U shape. And so this has brought about a lot of discussion about what is it? What trajectory do we have with our life satisfaction? And so I was reading this recent article, it's from 2022, and it really suggested that maybe some of the issues as to why we're seeing a U-shape, as well as other studies showing more stability with life satisfaction, is having to do with the type of data itself. So are we looking at cross-sectional data? Are we looking at longitudinal data? With the cross-sectional data, we were consistently seeing that U-shape, I believe it was, with the cross-sectional data. And then also thinking about control variables and which control variables were being included into these models. And so the idea was that once we include some of these important control variables, that's where maybe we stop seeing that U-shaped trajectory quite as clearly. And so I mean, this discussion is still going on, but then this paper that I was looking at, it was exploring data from, I think it was 20 different countries. And what they found is that there really was this slow increase in life satisfaction throughout adulthood. And it wasn't until advanced older adulthood, getting into 80s, that then they saw either stability with life satisfaction or a subtle decline then in life satisfaction. The drawback, though, with this particular paper and study was that it focused only on adults aged 50 and up. So there weren't any data to look at anybody younger than 50. So that's, unfortunate. So I was then looking at some other articles, trying to find some recent articles, and it also, I mean, there were some differences, again, looking at which control variables were included and longitudinal versus cross-sectional data. But in general, it was showing a bit more of stability. There was some change, especially throughout like early adulthood and then middle adulthood. And then you could see it slightly inclines or increase some and then decline. So I think it really depends on what the exact model is that's being tested. But overall, for adulthood, it seems as though really we are having this increase in life satisfaction from middle adulthood on, with either that stability or then slight decline as we're getting much older into our 80s and 90s. So I think that's extremely exciting. And to hopefully, emphasize that, especially with these stereotypes that aging adults are grumpier, older adults are grumpy, or just these more negative affective states?
Yeah, I'm not gonna ask you to answer this question, but because who knows, it might be too big. But maybe for a future episode, it is really interesting to think about sort of what are the intentional things that human beings can do to predict that kind of happiness as they age. Like, what are the choices you can make along the way to get to a place where you sort of maximize that potential later on. We talk all the time about retirement planning and the need to make good financial decisions to set yourself up for success. What are the lifestyle choices you need to make to set yourself up for emotional success?
Right.
That's really interesting. As you were talking there, one of the things I was thinking is about how, something you said really jumped out at me. It was the thinking about cross-sectional versus longitudinal, because being, it feels to me, and maybe I'm incorrect, but being elderly has changed considerably in the sense that, I mean, health outcomes are different now than they were 10, 20 years ago.
Right.
Whether or not you live close to your children is different now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. That all of these factors seem to influence that could potentially influence life satisfaction, that are really hard to predict. I mean, that it's hard to predict what that's going to be like when I am, an older adult instead of just an old one, and so on. Georgina, I want to ask some of these questions, or at least kind of run through these questions. But do you have anything first? Nope. Okay.
No, you go.
So I feel like we answered this already. Do we get grumpier as we get older? I feel like we answered that one. This was something that got me. I was wondering, I don't know if you'll have an answer to it, but about adults feeling excited and odd, and why they don't seem to feel as excited and odd as kids, why that doesn't show. Do you have thoughts on that? It's kind of a tough one, but.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting when I read that. And I hadn't really considered that before. But something that I read that stemmed from Carsonson's work was really this idea that as adults are aging, they're focusing more on those positive things. They're becoming more emotionally balanced and stable. And so maybe it is because of that balance and that emotional stability that they're not getting too focused on those negative aspects, but maybe by the same token, they're also not getting as overly like positive or feeling overly emotional in the positive way either. So there really is just this level of balance. I'm not sure, but that would be one way that I would, or that it struck me, and what I thought about in regard to it. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
I do. I was teaching about awe in one of my classes the other day, and we were talking about how many awe moments happen in nature. And I think we also know that older adults spend far less time out in nature for many reasons, especially older, like in their 80s and 90s, spend less time in nature. And so maybe they don't have access to awe-inspiring environments. And I thought that was a really interesting thought that one of my students shared in class.
I was wondering something similar, and it is whether or not maybe there is still a lot of awe there in older adulthood, but just what awes you might be different. That, I imagine seeing like a waterfall at that and going to like Niagara Falls or something like that might be something that sort of wows me now in ways that it wouldn't have wowed me when I was 5, that I wouldn't have necessarily grasped what a huge deal that is. Or maybe maybe another better example is like sort of technological accomplishments, that like what it would, how amazed I am to see some achievements, like some human achievements now, because I understand how difficult they are in ways I didn't when I was a kid. And so maybe sort of what you find wowing as an adult is just different than it used to be.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about. And actually, this just made me remember something. So when I was in grad school, my mentor, when I was leaving, she was starting to think about a project of using VR with, I think it was nature scenes and then like architecture, and to bring in adults and to try to measure awe. Um, and I think maybe also using students to look at maybe differences between, Ryan, kind of what you were saying, what was wowing to them looking at these same scenes. But I don't actually know what then came of that, so I should check in to see. But I kind of forgotten about that because it was, I was leaving or I'd already left, and that was on the table. But I think that's really cool to think about, because it makes sense that there could very well be different things that interest people based on your age, along with other things.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, there's some of it's emotional maturity and your ability to sort of put yourself in someone else's shoes. Some of it's just an understanding of the challenges. I mean, I saw the other day some sprinter who was like an octogenarian sprinter who set the record for whatever distance it was. And I mean, it's the kind of thing that when you're a kid, you might look at and say, oh, no, it's just a person running sort of slow around a track. But when you're older and you understand what an extraordinary accomplishment that is, or like you kind of have a sense for, I mean, the fact that I hurt myself reading is helps you realize that it's amazing what that person is able to do. And so that appreciation is different.
I think that's a great example.
Yeah, so I have one last question, and honestly, I don't know if any of us are going to know the answer, but I want to throw it out just for kicks, and that is people saying it seems to them that anxiety goes up, that they feel more anxious. Do we have any data on whether or not anxiety is like sort of increases over as we age?
I'm trying to see. So I had seen that question, and I wanted to try to pull something up. So all I have is, I mean, looking at NIH, so National Institute of Health, looking at the prevalence of any anxiety disorder among adults. This says that an estimated 19.1% of US adults had any anxiety disorder in the past year. But then looking at the age breakdown, because that's what I'm interested in, it really looks like the rate at which different age groups are having anxiety tends to decline. So as people are getting older, I don't know if they're less likely to have anxiety. It could be that it's not being reported. So I don't entirely know that, but just looking at the data, the rates decline from early adulthood to middle age slightly, and then even more so to older adulthood. But I don't know enough about that area to speak too much about, if that's an accurate representation.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Again, I think we might end up with some cohort effects too that might drive, like you said, underreporting and things like that could drive some of that. But that is fascinating nonetheless. So, G, before we finish up, do you have any last questions?
I just have begun to wonder as we're talking what different generations think of as older adults. Like when they were asking these questions on social media, I wonder if they're asking about me. Like, am I the older adult in question, or are they thinking about their great grandparents who are in their 90s? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's interesting to imagine how those stereotypes might change as the definitions or perspectives of different generations on what makes an older adult.
Yeah. Well, and I can tell you, even within the literature, different ages are used for middle adulthood, older adulthood. So generally I would say like 65 and above is oftentimes used for older adults, but that varies. I've seen people use 60 as the cutoff between middle age and older adult, but I've also seen it be higher. So it can really vary too, which is another point to consider of, okay, well, we're talking about middle-aged older adults in this study, but what are the actual ages?
Right.
So yeah, that's another thing where I continue to see that too.
Abby, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Do you have any final thoughts before we finish up?
No, thank you for having me on. I mean, I'm biased, but I think this is really interesting, especially since we do see these age stereotypes really permeating all throughout our society, whereas we see these positive things or encouraging things from the literature, from these research findings that older adults are more positive and that happiness is generally pretty high. So I think it's great to be able to chat about these things. So thank you.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, this is something when I talk about it in my Psych of Emotion class, which is, we don't spend very much time on it, but it's one of those things that I think students are really surprised by. It's not what they necessarily expect. And I think it's because of a lot of those stereotypes you were talking about. So. All right, so everybody make sure to check out at Psych and Stuff on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's a good place to get updates on shows and things like that. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, LinkedIn, probably other places too, at Anger Professor, YouTube, at Anger Professor. Georgina, where can people find you?
They can find me on many of those places, including LinkedIn, which I never even thought to mention ever, at GeorJeannawd.
I am seeing so much more LinkedIn usage in the last month than I ever have before. I don't know what's happening with LinkedIn, but it seems to be having a moment. So yeah, congrats, LinkedIn. Do you still have a MySpace page that people can find you on, Georgina?
No, yeah, no. Not that I'm going to share.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Psychology and Stuff is a production of Phoenix Studios at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. The executive producer is me, Ryan Martin, and the production manager is Rachel Scray. Our audio production coordinator is Bill Salick, and our graphic designer is Kimberly Vlies. Special thanks to our guest today, Abby Nearcorn-Bailey. If you haven't already, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also head over to our website, uwgb.edu/podcast, to check out past episodes of this and all our shows. I'm your host, Ryan Martin, and I'm here with my co-host, Georgina Wilson-Dengis. Keep being amazing.